When you first read the screenplay and your character, what was your kind of gut reaction to your character?
The first episode is an insight into Diana's humanity, and so my first instinct was, how is this woman known as the Ice Queen, and how did she become the most hated woman in Britain? So I was just hooked, because I didn't know very much about the Mitfords to begin with, and that was my first introduction to them. So it just sent me down a rabbit hole of research and wanting to know more, and kind of excitement that these women were finally having their story told.
Now, I love the sister bond. I felt there were 6 sisters that were real.
Yeah.
They loved each other, clearly, but obviously opposite in fight. Yeah. So how did you, especially with Nancy in the pilot, I love those scenes between you and Nancy. How did you kind of develop that, and how did you feel about those scenes?
Well, Nancy and I met up. Once we realized that we'd been cast, we connected and we went for a coffee, and we sat for like 4 hours and talked some stuff Mitford, but mostly just who are you as a person? And we could have talked all day if we didn't have to get the train. And I think spending that time before filming meant that the bond that we had on screen felt really real. And then when you're filming those scenes where you have to have an argument with someone, if you have that trust and that bond, it means that you can go there, you can push and you can try stuff. And then you come off set and you're like, babe, you were amazing. And it's just the joy of the support.
I did have, my favorite scene was your scene with your husband when he told you not to see Oswald again. It was such a great deterioration of marriage.
Yeah.
Like, it was such a beautifully written scene and performed. How did you feel about that scene, especially when you developed it with your co-star and the director? Because I thought it was wonderful.
Well, I love Callum Lynch. He is an absolute gem of a human being, and apparently Diana and Brian ended up being dear friends, and so we're hoping that he can come back for future seasons. But what I was actually given a little, I picked up on it when I read the script, but I was told that her apology is not an apology for having an affair. Her apology is because she's realized she's going to leave him in that moment. And what I love, is you touched on it, is the delicacy of the writing. I had 3 lines to communicate, I have decided to end this marriage, and I just thought, what a brave choice on Sarah Williams' behalf, and to trust me to deliver that. So that's what it felt like on set, was that everyone was trusting each other and pushing each other to give a deep and nuanced performance.
Well, you had to set up her whole entire arc in that one moment with that dialogue, and that's why that scene really stood out to me.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I'm excited to see when the show goes a little darker, obviously.
It sure does.
So how did you feel kind of balancing the tragicness and even the light moments?
Well, I think Diana is such a complex character. I mean, even Sarah Williams has said herself she's the most complex of all of the sisters. And actually what I think the show delves into is, how can someone who is actually very caring, very funny, adored by her family and friends alike, also have these extreme views that I definitely don't agree with, and Sarah doesn't agree with. So that is what I think the show delves into, and each scene was a sort of, well, where is she now on the spectrum? And that was an incredible challenge for me.
Well, that's what I love. You made her a real character, not the character we think she is.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm really glad.
People are not one thing or the other.
Well, that's the thing. So people feel like they know her because there's so much written about the sisters, and she herself wrote her own memoir, but I was given the letters that she exchanged, the private letters that she exchanged with Mary Lovell, on whose book the show is based. So I had this insight into her that I don't think anyone else has ever had, and it was my privilege to kind of bring those moments of magic to the screen.
All right, so what was your initial reaction when you first read the script to your character?
For my character, my initial reaction was, there's a lot of research and there's a lot of preparation that needs to go into performing a character like this. And, I came at it with pure curiosity and compassion, and I felt like that was the only way I could play a character like this.
Now, the sisters' bond's amazing. I love the sisterly love between the 6 of you. You had that special bond, but you're also right. You on polar opposite sides of the view. How is that creating that great sister relationship, but also a real genuine relationship where people had their own personalities and were able to kind of fight it out, so to speak?
Yeah, me and Zoe, I felt like in the script the most important relationship, well, there was so many important relationships, but the one with Decca is really quite special, because obviously Decca becomes becomes interested in communism, and then Unity obviously becomes interested in fascism, but they always remain that sisterly bond.
Yeah.
And me and Zoe, that doesn't come hard for us. She's like one of my best mates, and so, you know, we would tackle like difficult content by having a laugh in like the breaks and in the green room.
What was your initial reaction to your character when you first read the script? What was like your gut reaction?
How incredibly... I think that Decca was never satisfied in the world she lived in. I think she always looked at the bigger picture in society and thought, what can I do to make a change? And that for me I took away, and I thought, wow, she could so easily live the life that she lived growing up in this incredible affluent family, but she wanted to find her tribe, and I think for me that stuck.
So you have two sides. You have the wonderful sister bond, which I totally love, and I watched the pilot.
Yeah.
But your story has a really dark, tragic element to it. How is kind of integrating both those kind of elements into your character?
Very difficult, but you know, when life is very high, there's always a flip side, and you're always worried that things can change when you're at the peak of life. So I think those two in a way are actually quite similar, and especially the emotions. They always say, when you're laughing, you're very close to crying, and I think now kind of quite similar in ways. It wasn't too hard, actually. It wasn't too
And
hard.
when you first put on the costume, you first go onto the sets, how did you feel when you first like, oh my God, this world is real?
Incredible, and you know, the set decorators, Claire Collins, a costume designer, made that transition so easy and so fluid because I felt completely immersed. Yeah.
Now, I hate to bring up a controversy on set. I heard there was one character that stole all the scenes, the rat.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the rat stealing all those scenes?
So
Trying
jealous,
to steal the scenes.
So jealous. It wasn't fair. But honestly, looking the way it did, I don't blame it. It was so cute.
It was such a great character thing.
I know.
And the real character did that. It
I
was
know.
so much fun.
I know.
Like kind of like that rebellious.
Yeah, and my character Decca had a pet sheep.
Right.
And in a way, that's cooler in my opinion, but yeah.
As someone who's tied to the story,
Yeah.
family, great-grandson,
Yeah.
what was very important for you that they would capture in the story? How they would represent the family and all the...
Well, you know what? The show was all Sarah's idea. She pitched it to us. So I obviously knew about it. I had a bit of familiarity about it, but she had a really strong vision for these characters and what she wanted to achieve in the show. So I was with her. You know, I was helping her achieve what she wanted to achieve. So in a way, I didn't play that role of, this is my family, this is what I want to say. I was trying to help Sarah achieve the best version of her show.
Well, one of the things I know that I just talked to Joanna about it is what I liked about we all have a vision of all these characters from historical. That's not accurate. They're real people too, with real feelings, family. How do you feel like they showed the real family life and all the interesting relationship dynamics, and also obviously the public side?
Yeah, well, I think one of the really important creative steers that we had on this show was that, yes, these are real people, and we want to portray how the nitty-gritty of that. You know, they weren't always in ball gowns at parties.
Right.
You know, we have that, but actually they're also at home, like, you know, hanging out in the house in, you know, old woolly jumpers with holes in.
Exactly.
You know, so it's the texture of that real family life that we really wanted to put across, which I think is different from a lot of period dramas that we see on telly.
I felt it was real. I was looking at real people, and now I can then explore obviously the story goes darker, of course.
Yes,
With
absolutely.
the sisters, was that. I did also like the rat. How did you feel about the incorporating their fondness of animals and pets in the story?
Well, you know what? We didn't show the half of it. They had so many more animals than we were able to show. But, you know, they say don't work with children and animals, so we had to put a limit on it. The sheep was very naughty, the sheep that Jessica had to deal with.
Yeah.
But the rat was a really essential part of it because I think it shows Unity's strange mind and how she looks to the world and relates to the world. But Shannon, who plays Unity, she got very close to the rat, who was called Chuck.
Chuck.
And I saw Chuck's trainer at a recent screening we had in London, and Chuck now has 5 children, so the dynasty continues.
All right, so this story, we all have very strong opinions about these characters from history. How was it for you when you adapted the book, making sure that we show that, but we also show the real human side of each character and the complexity of both?
Yeah, that was really important to me, that we got the offstage version of them and not just the public image of them. And I think because they had all written a lot about themselves, a lot of them have written autobiographies, there are a lot of letters, but because they're British, they don't always express exactly what they're feeling, especially Brits from the 1930s. So it was good fun for me to kind of dig underneath a little bit and find out, from my point of view, you know, how a modern audience will relate to what they were going through and the decisions they made and why they made them. So it was, yeah, I loved it.
Of course, a lot of tragedy, but I love in the pilot getting to know the sisters as young kids,
Yeah.
like young. That was like one of my favorite things about the pilot.
Good.
How was it if you're kind of building their relationships? You got to build 6 sisters,
I know.
each different, but
I
all
know.
show their loving bond. Even though they were different, they loved each other.
Yes, they did. And actually, they were a very loving family, and those bonds lasted pretty much until they died. And their parents, although their parents were mad, eccentric people, they loved each other and they loved their kids. And they didn't always make the right decisions about what to do with their kids, but there was a lot of love in that family, especially in a British aristocratic family. There was a real bond, yeah.
My favorite scene in the pilot, which is really, I think the whole show hinges on pulling off the scene, which was done so beautifully, is when Diana and her husband, he says, don't see Oswald anymore.
Oh,
but
yeah.
you know that the marriage is falling apart and it's going to start her down a whole new journey. How did you approach that scene? Because I love the fact that Diana didn't have a lot of lines, but you knew exactly what was going on and where this was going. But it was also a very important setup for you.
Yes, I know. I mean, actually, quite a lot of the scenes, I didn't have very much time to do any setting up. So you had to get right to the heart of the scene straight away. And that was a real challenge. And I just, well, you know, you do what your instinct tells you, don't you? And I had some great actors, so I knew that they could do something with a look that didn't need a line. You know, they could do it with a look.
Well, it's also within character in 1930s British. Like they're not going to come out and say you're having an affair, you're cheating.
No.
But it was heartbreaking because they also care about each other, which
They
I
do.
thought was a beautiful. That was so. When you wanted to focus on making sure that they did love each other.
Yeah,
There wasn't
absolutely,
It wasn't a bad thing.
No.
It was just Oswald was more appealing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a crazy time when people didn't express their feelings, really. But somehow they knew without words.